Hey. Welcome. Hey, if you're back there, yeah, just finish up grabbing your coffee. Come on back from the bathrooms. It's going to be awesome night. Hey, while everybody's coming back up, how was your July 4th? Yeah, pretty decent. I have two things to celebrate. Number one was, this was my first 4th of July as a legal permanent resident. Got that green card. Yeah. Feeling very American. And second of all, my wife's birthday is on July 4th. And for the last 4 birthdays that I've known her, I have woefully been below her expectations on birthday plans. In fact, she's cried all 4 birthdays we've been together because I've been so disappointing. But for the first time, guys, she said this was her best birthday ever. And you know what I learned? It's the little things, just the little things with a little bit of planning. So I hope that your 4th of July was as good as my 4th of July. But let me just take to the board here for a second. So we're starting this brand new series called Emotional Hygiene. And I don't have anything on the back screen. I've got a blank screen looking at me, so I don't know what the deal is there. But we're starting this brand new series called Emotional Hygiene. And emotional hygiene comes from this thing that we heard from a guy called Guy Winch. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar, but Guy Winch, he did a TED Talk about emotional first aid. And in it, he talks about this really interesting concept of emotional hygiene. So he furthers it on. We watched the TED Talk, and it was really interesting. It was really amazing. And then he furthers it in an article by Psychology Today. And here's what he says. He says, in much the same way that dental hygiene involves brushing our teeth and flossing every day, which I believe the people who floss every day exist about as much as the tooth fairy does, and personal hygiene involves cleaning ourselves and taking care of physical injuries when we sustain them, emotional hygiene refers to being mindful of our psychological health, and this is important, adopting brief daily habits. Adopting brief daily habits that all revolve around our emotional hygiene. Now, a lot of us have not really ever thought about this idea. For some of us, this is a brand new concept. But I think that this is really important. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about 4 areas that I think we can start practicing some emotional hygiene. And within that, we're going to talk about 4 practices that you can actually do to start addressing that. Now, you might be asking, but why? And I say, because it matters. So I don't know if you've watched The Office, but I think if anyone in the world needs to practice some emotional hygiene, it's Michael Scott. This guy is just completely oblivious to everything going on. But here's a question. Have you ever said these words? I had no idea. I had no idea you felt that way. I had no idea people were saying that about me. I had no idea that this is how I was being perceived. I had no idea that I sounded like this. Have you ever said those words? Yeah? Here's what I want to do. I would love for us to just take a minute and tell somebody around you, when was the last time you said these words? What was happening in your life? Now, if you're here for the first time and you're like, I was really hoping that you weren't going to make me talk to somebody, great. Pull out your phone, it'll be fine. Go grab more coffee, and then it'll make you have to go to the bathroom again, but don't worry about it, it'll be fine. But take a minute, and if you're confident and comfortable enough, and you might have come here and been like, I really wanted to meet some people, now's your chance, right? If you're looking to meet a cute guy, cute girl, this is your chance. Tell them, when was the last time you said, I had no idea? Take a minute to do that. All right. Okay, is anybody feeling confident enough to tell me what was going on in your life the last time you said this?
I had no idea alcohol was that flammable.
I had no idea alcohol was that flammable. Okay, we need to talk after because I need the rest of that story. That's amazing. Anyone else? You're like, I had no idea you were going to ask me to do that. Now it's awkward. Okay. This is the time, apart from the flammable alcohol guy, which again, I definitely want to hear the rest of that story. I had no idea. This is somebody telling you, you talk too much. Like, you're just always talking. I had no idea that I interrupted so much. Somebody told me, like, gosh, you interrupt all the time. This is the person that's always on their phone when you're hanging out, right? You're watching Netflix, but they're on their phone the whole time. And you're like, seriously, this is going to be the funniest part. Please put your phone down. And they miss it. And how annoying is that? When you know the funny part's coming up, 10 seconds before it, they're still on the phone. You're like, please, just put the phone down, right? But I had no idea, right? This is oversharing personal details. We all know somebody like that. We all work with somebody like that who just overshares, and you're like, I do not need to know about your physical hygiene, or I don't need to know about what you did last night. Like, you're really telling too much. This is the people who never listen, and in conversations, they're just talking, but never hearing what other people are saying, or they're never asking questions. Do you know somebody like this? When you're in a moment with them, and you do all the talking, not because you want to, because they don't ask you a single question. And then you do that thing where you're like, I'm just going to give it 5 seconds. And if I leave it an awkward silence for 5 seconds, surely they'll ask a question. No, and they don't. Or this is you're always late, always showing up late, never apologizing. I had no idea. I didn't know I needed to apologize. This person's never apologizing, never says sorry. They're immature. Maybe this is the person who they had no idea that how they were acting in relationships was making them seem like a player. Right? This is the person who's angry and they're coming across really, really negatively, and it's making everybody around them feel like, ugh. It's the person who's passive aggressive, who doesn't ever want to have a negative confrontation in any other way but through email. Have you ever gotten one of these passive aggressive emails? You're like, just say it to me face to face. Or they send that awkward text, and the one that gives you the pit in your stomach. You're like, why do they always do that? Why can't they just come and talk to me? And here's the thing. You're making everyone uncomfortable. But here's why this matters. Because most of the time when you've said, I had no idea that I interrupt, I had no idea I talked so much, I had no idea that I never apologized, I had no idea, it's normally tinged with regret. There's normally some sense of, I'm saying this because I'm making an apology. Oh, I had no idea, and I'm so sorry. Sometimes I had no idea is followed by insecurity, because now we're figuring out, oh my goodness, I do all this stuff, and I had no idea that I did it. Maybe it's even followed by a pit or a bout of depression, because now you're thinking, I don't know if there's any hope for me. I don't know if I'm ever going to notice. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to stop doing those things. And what's the cure for this? What's the cure for this idea that leads us to saying, I had no idea, I had no idea, I had no idea? The cure is self-awareness. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is one of the attributes of emotional intelligence, and it's one of the essential practices of emotional hygiene. In fact, there was a philosopher, an ancient philosopher, who says this around the idea of self-awareness. He says, for a person who is not aware that he is doing anything wrong has no desire to be put right. I don't know that I'm doing anything wrong, so I had no idea. I didn't know there was anything to fix. You have to catch yourself doing it before you can reform. It's like, until I am aware, I can't save myself from doing it. And the truth is, we all want to save ourselves. Now, here's why this matters. Because the problem is, if you are lacking self-awareness, you yourself lack the awareness to be aware that you are lacking self-awareness. Do we do that again? If you're lacking self-awareness, you yourself lack the awareness to be aware that you are lacking self-awareness. The big problem with lacking in self-awareness is that if you're lacking self-awareness, you can't tell. You're the last person to notice that you didn't notice. You're the last person to get the idea that you had no idea, because you can't see a lack of awareness in the mirror. There is no lack of awareness mirror. You can't just figure it out all of a sudden. Unfortunately, self-awareness doesn't happen by accident. It's not as if we just figure it out. Awareness doesn't happen by accident. The only thing that happens by accident is not awareness, it's delusion. You can't become self-aware by accident. It doesn't just happen. You can become self-deluded by accident. You can get all sorts of confused. You can end up in some really awkward situations, but you can't become self-aware by accident. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't fall into our lap. Now, if you wouldn't consider yourself a church person, and up to now you have been pleasantly surprised that we've been talking about psychology and playing clips from The Office and not even mentioning the Bible, I'm about to disappoint you. But just give me a second, because I want to show you why, as Christians, we take Scripture seriously. And I think that there is something helpful here for you, even if you don't take Christianity seriously. Because a guy called Paul explains how we discover self-awareness. How do you become aware? Well, a guy called Paul is going to show us how. Now, he does this in a letter that he wrote to a group of people in Rome. Paul, if you're not familiar with Paul, Paul was one of the early leaders of the Christian church. He hated Christians to begin with, wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth, thought that they were just a renegade Jewish cult, and so wanted to get rid of them. He, as a good Jew, wanted to just annihilate all of the Christians. But he ends up, through a random set of circumstances, becoming a Christian. And he becomes a leader in the Christian church and ends up as what we call an apostle or a leader. And he starts writing letters to help churches all over the Mediterranean region learn more about what it means to follow Jesus. So in one of these letters, he's writing to the church at Rome, which at that time was the largest and most important city in the world. And he had never been to Rome, but he was writing to this church because he had found out some stuff about them and was trying to help them understand what it means to follow Jesus and who Jesus truly was and what it means to live your life for him. So here's what Paul writes and why this can help us become more self-aware. So here's what Paul says. He says this: so do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. Now, you might not have thought about this before, but your family of origin had a pattern. It had a way of doing things, a way of handling conflict, a way that they spoke to each other, a way that they acted at the dinner table, a way that they handled finances. They had a pattern. And a lot of that stuff we picked up. It's not just your family of origin. It's the group of friends that you grew up with. It's the group of friends that you chose to hang around with now. They have a pattern of how they do things. There's like a little culture, a little subculture amongst your group of friends. It's from the faith that you grew up in, whatever faith or whatever denomination you grew up in. It's the city that you came from. It has a pattern. It has a way of doing things, a way of seeing the world, a manner of behaving. The school that you went to, the company that you now choose to work for. Somebody got to all those places first, and they established a pattern. Not because they're better than you, just because they got there before you. And they established a pattern. And what happens is people start conforming to the pattern. This is what Paul says. There is a pattern, and the automatic fallback is we just conform to whatever the pattern is. And if you and I are unaware, we just fall right into the pattern that's been established before us. But Paul says there's an alternative. Here's the alternative. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Paul's like, look, you could just go along with the pattern and be like everyone else and just behave like everyone else, see the world like everyone else, and just fall into this to where you almost just become robotic. You're just doing things because that's how it's done. You just do things because somebody else did it that way, because you don't know any other way to behave or act or talk or run your life. Paul says, no, don't do that, though. There's a way that you can be transformed by thinking differently. He calls it renewing your mind, thinking differently about things. Start thinking differently about the way you behave. Start thinking differently about why you do the things that you do. Because the only way to become self-aware, Paul would say, is on purpose. Only way to become self-aware is on purpose. It takes something active. Renewing your mind is an action. Beginning to think differently is an action. The only way you can become self-aware is on purpose. Here's another way to say it. The only way to see the real me is intentionally. The only way to see the real me is intentionally. Do you want to see what you look like? Do you want to see how you behave from someone else's perspective? Do you want to see what it looks like to be your boyfriend? Do you want to see what it's like to work with you? Do you want to know what it's like to be in a conversation with you? You got to do it intentionally. If you want to see the real me, you can only do it intentionally, because self-awareness only happens on purpose. One of my bosses, his name is Tim Cooper. He's one of the smartest people I know, and he says this all the time. He says, you can never passively find what you don't actively pursue. You can never passively find it. It's not just going to happen. Again, it's not just going to fall into your lap. And if you want to be self-aware, if you want to get rid of saying, I had no idea, I didn't know you felt this way, I didn't know people were saying this about me, I didn't know I looked like that, you have to actively pursue it. But when you take that action, you transform. The question is, into what? So Paul continues. He says this. He says, then, when you start renewing your mind, when you start thinking differently, get outside the pattern, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. Now, that's kind of a big idea, that God has a will for you. And I don't know if this is all mapped out. I'll leave that to the philosophers, whether or not any of us really have free will. I listened to a great podcast about that the other day. It was really sciencey. I didn't understand half of it, but at the end of it, I was like, whoa, right? I'll leave that to them to decide this. But I believe that if God created you and loves you, then God has a best in mind for you. If he created you and he loves you, he must have a best in mind for you. And Paul says he does, because God's will is good, pleasing, and perfect. God's will is good, pleasing, and perfect. It's perfect because it's perfectly designed for how you are made. If God made you, he knows everything about you. He knows your personality. He knows where you come from. He knows where you're going. And if he has a best in mind for you, then it is perfectly suited for your purpose. I don't know if you've ever seen anything being used out of its purpose. There was one day, a little while back, I was off speaking at a student camp, and I was walking backstage, and I saw this beautiful wooden cajon. Do you know what that is? It's basically like a cajon is a wooden drum that you sit on. It's like a box, and you sit on it and you play it. And it sounds awesome. When you see somebody play it well, it sounds amazing. And I walk around backstage, and I see this beautiful cajon, and it's being used as a doorstop to hold a door open. I'm like, why would you do that? Like, yes, it will work for that. Like, yes, like it'll hold your door open. But that's not what it's perfectly designed for. That's not the purpose of the thing. Paul would say God's will for you, his best for you, is perfectly designed for your purpose, for who you are and the way you're created. And it's pleasing. In other words, it will be enjoyable for you. Because when you are your best self, when you are becoming more and more of who you truly are and who you're comfortable with and how I believe God made you, it's pleasing, that's enjoyable. And it's good because it will benefit you, it'll benefit your community. When you're living according to God's best for you, it'll be better for your family, it'll be better for your friends, it'll be better for your workplace. And here's the deal. Nobody says no to that. So how do you start renewing your mind? How do you start renewing your mind? How do you put into practice what Paul says? How do you do it on purpose? How do you pursue self-awareness? I think the best way to kickstart self-awareness is by gathering information from the outside. That's the best way to do it. If you want to know how you are acting, if you want to know how other people think about you, the best way to do it is collect some information from the outside. And here's why I say that. Because self-awareness is rarely figured out. It must be pointed out. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish that we could sit down and just journal about it, and for some people, that works. But most of the time, self-awareness can't be figured out. It must be pointed out. And the thing about that is, that's painful. I know a little bit about this. So, when I first met my wife, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, my wife is Mallory. She's an American, which is why I live in America. We met online. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. So Mallory was working here at this church, and I was working at a church in Ireland. I saw her hosting North Point Online, which is our live service. I thought, she's cute, looked her up on Twitter, stalked her, and we started a conversation. So we started, chatting. First it was on Facebook, and then we started texting and stuff. And then I was kind of saying, hey, I think we should talk on FaceTime, because I thought I am suave as a mother, so this will be perfect. This is how I'm going to impress her. So I eventually convinced her to get on FaceTime, and we talked for about, I don't know, it was probably an hour and 30 minutes or something. It was a long time. And it wasn't my first rodeo. I'd talked to girls before, and I had this whole persona that I used, and it was all about, I'm going to tell my best stories. I'm going to be super engaging. I'm going to tell all about the things, I'm going to do the humble brag, all the time, and she's going to be really impressed by me. And as the conversation was going on, though, I noticed that it was getting worse and worse. I'm like, I know that we're 4,000 miles away, but it feels like we're 40,000 miles away. Like, this is getting worse and worse. And by the end of the conversation, I was completely deflated. I was like, oh my God, none of my tricks worked. What is wrong with me? I got to reassess, got to get back in a huddle or something and get some coaching. I really didn't know. So after I hung up the phone from Mallory, I called one of my other friends. I was like, that did not go well. Like, I thought it was going to be amazing. That did not go well. And I was really bummed about it. So the next day, I sent Mallory a text. And I said, hey, I was going to put this out there, but I felt like our conversation last night went really badly. Like, why? And she said something that I will never forget. And honestly, it was a life-changing moment for me. And when you hear this, you're going to be like, you're an idiot. But this was a big deal for me. I said, Mallory, why did that go so badly? And she said, you didn't ask me a single question. You didn't ask me one question about me. You just talked the whole time. And I had no idea that I did that. I didn't know. I had no idea that I did that. And I probably did it so many times. I had no idea until it got pointed out to me. Because I couldn't figure it out. It had to be pointed out. I couldn't just start falling into self-awareness. I had to renew my mind by having it pointed out to me, painfully so. But here's the thing. There's a piece of emotional hygiene. There's a practice that I would love for you to consider. There's a guy his name is Jeff Henderson. He's one of our campus pastors at our Gwinnett campus. And he's one of the smartest, wisest guys that I know. But he did a talk to our church, and he talked about this kind of idea of self-awareness and how do you discover what it's like, in conversation, what's it like to be in a relationship, all this sort of stuff. And he says, here's what you need to do. And I want you to consider this practice of emotional hygiene. I want you to take this into consideration just as much as you do when you take a shower in the morning, or when you put on deodorant, you brush your teeth, and you floss once a year, something like that, right? I want you to consider this emotional hygiene practice. Here's what it is. It's asking this question. What's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to be on the other side of me? And I don't mean sit in front of a mirror and ask yourself, what's it like to be on the other side? No, I'm not talking about that. I mean, find somebody who knows you. Find somebody who you're in relationship with. It might be a coworker who you sit next to, who knows a lot about you. It might be a family member. It might be your partner, your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. It might be, find somebody in your life who you trust, who knows you, and then ask them, what is it like to be on the other side of me? And if you feel at the end of that, when they've given you some feedback, if you feel like, gosh, that was the worst thing I've ever done, and you push back, I just want to ask you, ask yourself why. Right? Ask yourself why. What do you have to lose from taking that advice seriously? Because they might not be totally accurate, right? Maybe they have some misperceptions. But just to get some of that feedback, what do you have to lose by taking it at least seriously? To say, hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me in conversations? Hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me in meetings? Hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me in these projects? Hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me in our relationship, in our dating, in our marriage? What's it like to be on the other side of me? Here's why I think that you should do this. And no matter how awkward it is, I think that you need to do this because self-improvement is impossible without self-awareness. You want to improve? You want to be your best self? You want to be the best that God has in mind for you? Self-improvement requires self-awareness. They go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. If you're not self-aware, there's not going to be any self-improvement. And I know that there is a better you inside you. I know that there is a better boyfriend, there's a better girlfriend, there's a better husband, there's a better wife on the inside of you. I know that there's a better work colleague. I know that there's a better manager. I know there's a better employee. I know there's a better parent. I know there's a better friend there. But the self-improvement is only going to come through self-awareness. Self-awareness allows you to understand other people and how they perceive you and what your attitude and your behavior looks like to them. Self-awareness requires us not to look at the story that we tell ourselves, but to look at the reality of how we behave. And having self-awareness, it creates an opportunity to make changes in your behaviors and in your beliefs. If you don't have self-awareness, that's never going to happen. A lady on our staff, Lori Kimball, she works in our adult ministries environment. She recently told me this, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Can you send that to me in an email? Because this is incredible. So here's what she says. She says, when we learn to grow from feedback, and feedback is hard, but when we learn to grow from feedback, we become better versions of ourselves. And when we become better versions of ourselves, we positively impact and influence those around us. I know you want to positively impact those around you. I know you want to positively impact your community. I know you want to positively impact your school or where you work. I know you want to positively impact the people you're in relationship with. And I know that you want to have influence. And you probably want to have more, not less. Self-awareness is the key. And my hope for you is that as you intentionally pursue self-awareness, as you start to invite feedback, that you would say this less and less. My hope for you is that you begin renewing your mind as you start purposely moving towards self-awareness, that this would become the exception and not the rule for you. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, thank you for having a best in mind for us. And sometimes it's hard to see what that is, and it gets clouded. And most of the time, we're standing in our own way of becoming our better selves. So God, would you help us to pick up this piece of emotional hygiene? Would you help us to ask that tough question, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And then not just to hear the feedback, but to act on it. God, I know for many of us that's going to take courage, and we're all at different areas, but none of us are perfect in this. So God, would you give us the courage to ask the question and the humility to do something about it. In Jesus' name, amen.